Hola y bienvenidos a esta presentación. In this presentation, we'll talk about how to form formal commands or ustedes commands. What do we mean by formal? Formal is when you're speaking to someone who is older than you. Formal is when you're speaking to someone in a position of authority to you, in a professional setting, or someone that you just met. The way to form formal commands is very similar. It's actually the same as the negative to commands. The first step is going to be to get the present tense yo form. And it's important to do this because in a verb like salir, for example, salgo has a G. We're going to keep that irregularity. So any irregular yo forms are going to keep the irregularity, which means, again, it's important to actually conjugate it into the yo form. The second step is to take the O off of the ending. To take the O off of the yo form. And then instead of adding the opposite to form for two commands, we're going to add the opposite usted or ustedes form. So for AR verbs, we're going to add an E or an EN. Hable, hablen would be the usted and ustedes command. And for ER and IR verbs, we're going to add an A and AN to the end of the verb after you've taken off the O. What's different about these commands and the familiar commands is that simply to make these negative, we put a no in front of the commands. Whereas with the familiar commands, it was a completely different process for the affirmative and the negative. There are irregulars. They are the same irregulars as the negative to commands. These are irregular because they do not end in an O in the yo form, so you can't follow the steps and drop the O. These need to be memorized, and the negative and affirmative command, formal, for id is vaya, vayan, and we simply again put the no in front to make it negative. Estar is esté, estén with an accent mark on the E. Ser is sea, sean. Dar is de, den. And saber is sepa and sepan. We also have irregulars in verbs that end with CAR, GAR, and AR, and ZAR rather. They all end in AR, so when we add the E, the opposite ending, that changes the sound of the original infinitive. So to take care of that, verbs that end in CAR, like tocar, are going to end in a QUEN, or QUE. Verbs that end in GAR end in GUE, or GUEN, and ZAR verbs are going to end in CE, or CEN. So let's talk about what to do with a pronoun and formal commands. For the negatives, it's exactly like the negative familiar commands, and we put the pronoun before the command. So if it's a negative, it's going to go between the no and the command. No me diga is don't tell me. Do not do it. It refers to la prueba, a feminine singular object. No la haga. Do not buy them. Los aretes, the earrings, is masculine and plural. No los compre. And if you're telling a group not to buy them, you would say no los compren. Do not wash your hands. No se lave las manos. Now, for reflexive verbs, we are going to use a pronoun se. Since we are talking to usted or ustedes, that would be the appropriate reflexive pronoun. Whereas with familiar commands, we would use te because we're speaking to one person our own age, or that we're familiar with. With affirmatives, exactly like the affirmative familiar commands, we are going to add the pronoun to the end of the command. Do it. It refers to la tarea, a singular feminine noun. Hágala, háganla. Since haga and hagan have two syllables, we're adding a third, la. We need to go 3 syllables from the end. Again, you always count syllables from the end of a word in Spanish, not the beginning. We're going to put the accent on the third vowel from the end. That's the strong vowel in the third syllable from the end. Drink them. Bébalos, or bébanlos. And for reflexive verbs, again, the pronoun we're going to use with both usted and ustedes commands is se. Dúchese, dúchense. And to tell someone to be quiet, and this is respectful, you're not being disrespectful by telling them to cállese and cállense. In an aggressive tone, this could be considered telling someone to shut up, so you want to make sure to have a polite, respectful, professional tone when you ask someone to be quiet. Practiquemos. Please pause the video if you'd like to practice these before we go over the answers. The usted, ustedes commands of each of these, of tener rather, is tenga, tengan, vivir, viva, vivan. Ser is one of the 5 irregulars that we need to memorize. Sea, sean. Ir as well is also an irregular. Vaya, vayan. Poner has an irregular yo form, pongo. So the commands for poner are ponga, pongan. Escribir is regular. Escriba, escriban. Salir, as we saw earlier in the video, is salga, salgan. And we'll end with 2 reflexives, so we need to use the pronoun se. To tell someone to bathe would be bañese, bañense. Notice the accent mark on the 3rd syllable from the end. And to form a negative command, a negative reflexive command, we're going to say no se levante, no se levanten, to tell someone not to get up. Gracias por ver este video y te deseo mucho éxito.